Hello, everybody. Grant Hunter here with another Product Growth Leaders topic of the week. Steve, we've been doing our Principles of Product Strategy course, and we got into product strategy this week. And I said, what a good time to actually have that conversation here, right? In the topic of the week. We haven't had a product strategy conversation in a long time. And so, how about we have some good conversation of product strategy?
Good deal. Well, that's your kind of your home turf. You're very comfortable talking about strategy. And I find that nobody actually knows what they mean by strategy, but they know somehow that it's better than tactics. You can't call your mom and say, hey, I've got a new job where I'm a tactical person. So it'll be interesting to see what we think of product management and strategy today.
No, and definitely, as you said, it's difficult. I think the one thing that I found is that most people have no idea what strategy really is. They know the word, but they don't know how to do it. So we'll get into it. And so we're talking about product strategy today.
Before you go there, I have yet another story. I remember I remember a marketing person speaking to a room of marketers saying, you really can't do any sort of promotional marketing if you don't know your strategy. And everybody just kind of threw down their pens and said, oh, well, then we're screwed. I mean, we don't seem to have a strategy. Our executive team's sense of strategy is sell more.
I was talking to somebody, said, what is your strategy? To accelerate our growth rate. I'm like, that's not a strategy. So we're going to get into it. We got a great panel today. We got Cory Brian, Calvin Marshall, and a first-time panelist, Dave Jones. And Dave Jones has known Steve for a long time. So we'll be talking about product strategy on Monday. We put the question in the community, what is it about product strategy that makes it so hard? And, we had some great people coming in with a lot of stuff. We actually had a lot of laundry list of stuff. Cory, you said in most cases, I believe that strategy, once you come up with it, is infallible. Talk to me about your thoughts on that.
I I've seen so many companies and people invest so much time in the strategy. I use air quotes there, that they spend months on it. It's so detailed and it's so specific that it can't possibly fail. So it's the strategy, it's the best strategy, and we're going to move forward with it without fail. And I just think that's wrong because I think strategies are directional; they're not specific. But I just get wrapped up into we're going to spend, it's kind of like the budget process, the annual budget process. The annual budget process starts 4 months before the calendar year, and then 2 months into the calendar year, it's already over budget and we have to replan and rebudget. So I get the same sense that people are doing that with their strategies as well.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It's not a planning process, right? Too often people look at the strategic planning process and say that's their strategy, and it's not. It's a difficult thing to get to. Sam Hagen said it can feel insurmountable to get started, right? If you don't have it, it can feel insurmountable. What do I'd love to get the panel's takes on that. Do you think that it can feel insurmountable to get started, Calvin?
I think part of it is there's the old metaphor of the elephant, the blind man and the elephant, and everybody's touching a different part of it. And I think that's why it makes it so hard, because I mean, in your example right now, because everybody's coming at it with from a different point on the curve.
Yeah.
Viewing it from their own lens. And I think that's and I didn't think of that when I responded, but that's part of it that makes it difficult as well.
And I think part of that, Brian Cohn had actually responded after Sam did and said the number of stakeholders and influences itself makes it hard to start and sort of insurmountable. Dave, I'd love to get your take on this.
Well, I'm going to give you maybe a little bit different of a take. My background, I was in the military for about 10 years. I worked as a Russian translator and was often attached to units as an attaché to help translate the things that come out on the battlefield. And they would constantly pull out these battle strategies And those were all fine when they were put together. The problem is they don't survive contact with the enemy. The situation changes. So the issue became they were unwilling or unable to adapt as the situation changed. So anytime somebody puts forward a strategy and I say, okay, what happens or what can we challenge here that may not remain consistent or that may change? We need to have a plan to mitigate that when it happens. Unfortunately, not too many companies or organizations look beyond that. Here's the strategy. Let's go.
It actually, your answer, Dave, reminds me of the parable of the hedgehog and the fox. Do you guys know the hedgehog and the fox?
Yeah.
I figured if you're a military person, you might, right? And comes from a Greek parable. There was a great essay written on it in the early 1900s. And this concept that the hedgehog is this singularly focused visionary who can really think of one thing and drive people to get stuff done. James Collins actually talks about the hedgehog concept and said that's what you need. You need a hedgehog. You need somebody to have a singular vision that can get people behind it and that type of stuff. And the fox is overly analytical of everything around them. And, which is that you need. And research actually showed, even though Jim Collins, who's a researcher, says that you should be a hedgehog, research shows that foxes are actually better at predicting the future because they take in all the things around them. But the problem is they can't get people to buy into what they do. And On Grand Strategy, a great strategy book, which talks a lot about military strategy, said the problem with strategy is you need to be both a hedgehog, have that singular plan, like you said they start with, but a fox who then can react to everything that's happening on the ground. And sort of, it's almost as Steve would call it, a purple squirrel. You're asking somebody to be singularly focused as a visionary, charismatic person, but also analytical enough to help adjust in as you go through doing these types of things. So I love that, Dave. Calvin, you had raised your hand briefly, or did I scare you off with the fox and the hedgehog?
No, I'd never heard that before, and I like that a lot. And it's funny because it ties into something I'm working on. But I think when David immediately shared what he had, it reminded me of something that Mike Tyson said, which is everybody has a plan until they get, when they get in the ring, everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth.
Yeah.
It's like,
I think he might have paraphrased Dwight Eisenhower.
I don't think Mike Tyson read Dwight Eisenhower.
Yeah, and that also reminds me of something that I think General Schwarzkopf said, which said, in the heat of battle, plans are irrelevant. Or, I'm paraphrasing, but plans are irrelevant. But it's the planning process that really that's really beneficial, because you start to think about what might happen and what could happen, and if you've really done a good job on thinking through potential outcomes, if things go sideways, you have kind of an off ramp.
Well, I think if that's what Schwarzkopf said, he was paraphrasing Sun Tzu, right?
Everybody gets it from somewhere.
Everybody's paraphrasing Sun Tzu when it comes to strategy, right? Strategy without tactics is a long road to victory. Or tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Or he had another one about the general who does calculations before the battle will win over the general who doesn't do does little. But this goes to part of it, right? Strategy is not just a business and product thing. It's something we can learn a lot from great philosophers and military where we're going to it. Steve, any of your thoughts on the fact that this is insurmountable and it's ambiguous before we move on from that?
Well, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of you or not, but I think
you probably are, but you always do.
It's a discussion about what do we mean by strategy, for that matter, right?
Yeah.
As I said, everybody wants to be strategic, whatever that is, because otherwise they can't, say something nice to their mom. And when Dave was talking about some of the military metaphors, I was reminded of the concept of commander's intent, which is, and I'm here we are all paraphrasing these military people. It seems like it was Patton who said, never tell people how to do things. Tell them what the objective is and get out of their way.
Go take the hill.
go take the hill. There you go. There's our strategy. You know?
Well,
So
take the hill is the strategy, is part of the strategy. It's one of the actions you take. So if you want to talk into what is strategy, one of the best definitions of strategy I've seen is from as the Richard Rummel good strategy, bad strategy, the strategy currently talks about. And I don't remember exactly the terms he uses, but because I've adapted them myself. But
all of us are paraphrasing things we sort of remember that we've read in the last 52 years, and it's just fun.
So Rummel basically said there's three parts of a strategy. The first part is the analysis. You know, why is this? What's the situation that, you know, why are we in this situation? And this is this happened. And for us, we like analyze the market, analyze the competition. Tell me what's happening to your product. Where are you in your life cycle, right? Where are you in the competitive ladder? All those things matter and impact what your strategy is. But from that, you then have to come up with a policy or philosophy. What is your general philosophy of what we're going to do? This is where I sort of lean into Roger Martin. What's your winning aspiration? Where to play? How to win? Those types of things are a core thing. So that help us understand, okay, we're playing. Our goal, our aspiration is to do this, win this battle. One of the, we're going to do it by leveraging our cavalry or our tanks, right? Here's what our strengths are. I'm getting way too military when I'm not a military person. And then the final thing, so you have what's the current situation now? So that what's your policy or philosophy or approach? And then the final thing is, how are you going to do that? What's your plan? Strategic actions you're going to take. And so when I look at strategy, I like to bring into those three things. Okay, have you done the analysis of the current situation and potential variations of what could happen? Based on that, how are you going to define your winning aspiration, where to play, how to win? And finally, what are the actions you need to take to do that? And so I would say that would be a crisp view of what a strategy is. Cory, you've got something to say.
It's a non sequitur, but since we're quoting others and since it's the first thing that popped in my head whenever I hear the word strategy, is I'd like to bring it back to one word, and that's strategery.
Strategery. Well, unfortunately, I think strategery is almost the opposite of strategy, right? Strategery is sort of we're doing all these things thinking we're being strategic, but probably not.
And that's what it feels like when I'm going through these conversations. It's like, are we really trying to be strategic? Are we really coming up with strategies? Or are we just doing activities around strategy to seem strategic?
Well, that justifies going off site to a 3-day meeting at a very high-end hotel.
Look, as long as I get my cinnamon rolls, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the cookies in the afternoon for me that I love. So we will do that. What is your favorite snack at a conference or offsite? That'll be one of our topic of the weeks. All right. Jen Tui came in and said, in addition to others, we have to enable the right level of detail and let your team own their parts of it. But too often product strategies are too prescriptive. This comes sort of back to something you were saying originally, Cory. We can't be too prescriptive with these. I think Dave said, take the hill. What's your take on that, Cory?
We should definitely allow the teams and the people to enact the strategy, come up with the best way to do this or the best path to get to this type of this hill, to use that metaphor again, but be very clear and very precise of why that hill is important. So the strategy, now I can't stop saying it. The strategy is now take the hill. The hill is important because we get to view all the battlefield and we get to see all these things. Telling somebody why something's important, even though it is your strategy, lets them figure out the best way to solve that.
Or you made a really good point there. I want to make sure that kind of gets emphasized is, you need to start with that why. There's a pretty good book out there called Start With Why that talks about exactly that. How do you get people behind that strategy and get them to enable the tactics that allow them to, quote, take the hill? It's because they understand the reason why. If they don't, their heart's not in it, they're not dedicated, and they're not going to devote the time, energy, and resources to it. So they may get halfway up the hill and say, well, this is good enough.
Yep. I completely agree, Dave. And
That reminds me of this is, yeah, I'll just say it reminds me of one of the key ideas in SAFE as it relates to PI planning. And I know that, on this program, we've had a lot of people say, you could either do SAFE or you can do Agile. But, without getting into that religious issue, the first step of planning is an update from a business leader about what's going on in the business and why we're doing the things we're doing. And I remember my first job as a product manager, I went into talk to the team and I said, well, here's the feature we want, and the sales guy wants this feature, and the executive team wants this feature. And they went, hang on, Steve, who do we sell this to? What problems do they have? And before you know it, I'm doing like my business presentation for them. Here's the market we serve, and here are the problems they have. And they were like, this is the kind of information we need. If you will, the product strategy bits or the business bits, we'll figure out the tactics. Cory feels the need to weigh in. I can feel.
So I forgot, and I put it in my answer, but I think it's something that we miss when we're talking about strategy. Strategy is a means to an end, right? The strategy helps us enact our product vision or our company vision or whatever we have. So if several times we don't have that vision, so coming up with a strategy to meet that vision is where you get into we need to grow the market, or we need to, we need 10% more velocity this quarter. That's not a strategy because it doesn't lead anywhere. So the vision, I think, is important to have first, and then your strategy is how you're going to get to that vision.
And that's sort of when we look at it, we talk about a winning aspiration as sort of aligns with the vision of where it's going to go. And we were doing an exercise this week in our class on this, and somebody's like, the aha they had was, oh, if I make the vision about the customer more than about my company, maybe that's gonna. And that's one of the key things, right? Roger Martin says your vision should be about both your company and the customer. As Drucker said, the purpose of a company is to create a customer. So we need to start with that person, those customers in mind. With where
Who would have thought on this program we would say something like, focus on the needs of the market and the business will benefit.
Yeah, and that's an argument I've had with some people when we talk about this stuff. It's like, and Steve and I had a conversation with a UX thought leader recently, and she asked the question, why are so many MBA type product people more focused on business value than on customer value? Because if you deliver customer value, doesn't that lead you to business value? And my response was, well, part of it is you have so many ideas of what you can do. You need to be able to understand where's the place where you can optimize both. And that's sort of what strategy is. But I love the why. I love the purpose of it. I think one thing I would say, why it's so hard also is I made this mistake as a young product leader. I had the strategy. I had the why. They got the why. And I said, okay, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take that hill. Okay, after we take that hill, we're going to cross the ravine. Okay, after we cross the ravine, we're going to do this. In my head, I had 3, 4, or 5 chess moves in play. And I found most people couldn't understand past that first take the hill. So they understood the why. But you also have to be, I think, that's maybe where Jen was getting with the too prescriptive. Cory, you talked about that as well. You can't be too specific. I like to think of strategy as guide rails, right? You're giving them sort of a rails of, to keep them, or bumpers in your bowling alley if we were kids. So, Calvin, you talked about the delicate balance between the known and the unknown. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, and I think for better or worse, it's something that I'm dealing with now. And, gathering data, trying to understand what the market is based on current data, as well as making some guesstimates on where I think the market may go, and just pulling that into thinking about strategy and the strategic direction.
Okay. I love the idea of this balance of the known and the unknown. And this sort of goes to back to the hedgehog and the fox, right? We have to make decisions on not full information. right?
Yeah, and that's kind of where, where I was going when I said that, when I was thinking about the hard parts. I mean, there's a lot of really good answers here, and I agree with most, if not all of them. And then there's kind of this, this piece that I was looking at about, well, it takes some time to begin to create this and craft this and pull together data and understand where the market is going, etc. So that's kind
Yeah.
of what the mindset was on that.
Calvin, you bring
Yeah.
up a really, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Calvin, you bring up a really good point. When we look at somebody's company strategy, they're often very short and distinct, but the amount of time, effort that was put into crafting them, hopefully, was a whole lot more time than it takes to read them, because of those influences that you talk about, is understanding, the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the customer's point of view in that. Yes, as a business, that's who we're there to serve, but make it a little more in depth than just that, cute marketing slogan.
Yeah, I love that. And to Calvin's point about this sort of what we know and what we don't know, Peter Drucker, his quote, and I'm going to paraphrase him because I don't remember the exact quote, is there's a big difference between a simple guess and an educated guess, right? Mm-hmm. Based on things we've known, a hunch, it was a hunch and an educated guess, right? I used to call them somebody would say, where'd you come up with that? I'm like, it was a wag, which is just a wild ass guess. But if I had put a little thought and logic to it, it became a swag, a scientific wild ass guess, right? Which is a little more thought through. And so part of business, part of life is making decisions without full information of what's going to happen, where it's going to go. And so that is an incredibly hard part. I when I was reading it the first time, I'm like, I love this idea of it's hard because of the known and the unknown, where we're going to go. So I appreciate you bringing that up. May Wong, who's not with us today, I loved what she said. She goes, because in most cases there's a belief that a strategy, once you come up with it, is infallible. That's why people spend so much time on it up front. That's why it's too detailed after, why so much rides on it. And if it's wrong, then the whole house of cards that it was built on collapses. And she said, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Instead, use and adopt the strategy work towards the product vision, empower the teams to take many small steps to figure out what works and get you there. Learn and embrace the reality that you'll have lots of little failures as you go. Celebrate the things. Think big, work small. And I love the idea of the iteration, right? In strategy, too often, people view it as the ultimate one thing and you don't have to change it. And that's what we talk about in our classes. This is a working, living document, right? We're going to base this on assumptions we have. We're going to go to the market, we're going to learn, and we're going to have to pivot and evolve it as we're doing it. Cory.
So that was my comment. May's comment was about setting your strategy to be what you'll focus on and also saying what you won't be focused on. And I think that's one of the hardest things for strategy folks or strategies is when people say, well, we're not doing this area. We're not focusing on this customer. We're not focusing on this market, this business, or this bag of money that somebody's throwing at us. We're focusing on these things and not these other things. And a lot of people want the world.
Yeah, that was actually purely a copy and paste error on my side when I was putting my notes together. So I have two notes on exactly the same thing, one with Cory, one with May. I apologize, May, for messing that up. So, I love what you're saying with that.
Paraphrasing people, I'm fairly sure it was Steve Jobs who said something along the lines of strategy is saying no to 1,000 things so you can say yes to one thing.
I like that.
And Barb Nelson always says, we need to focus on the vital few instead of the compelling many.
Yeah, well, I mean, that goes back to even Michael Porter, the sometimes viewed father of business strategy. And strategy is about focus, right? Simple, but how do you focus? How do you do that is part of the issue with this. And, the one thing...
I wanted to offer a comment on something you said earlier, and I used it in a meeting once, and it befuddled the executives, so I'm going to continue with it for the rest of my life. There were several other product managers who were challenged on certain things, and they said that they were using, the swag. And when it came my turn for, explaining my strategy, I told them that it was a CWAG. It was a scientifically educated wild ass guess. And when I used the term CWAG, they thought they didn't know what it was, obviously, and didn't challenge it. But the other thing that, as we were developing the product strategy for the product I was working on, that I introduced to them was, we've all heard the postmortem. Let's look at the patient after they're dead and find out what killed them. And
Yep.
oftentimes when a strategy fails, people do that type of thing. Well, there's a concept out there like, well, before we go into the surgery that might kill the patient, let's do a planning session or a pre-mortem. The patient hasn't died yet. Let's find out what could go wrong and have a plan if it does. If we run out of anesthesia, we have another tank. What if the doctor gets tired and can't continue? We have a backup doctor. So those type of planning things for that pre-mortem and a strategy, I think are oftentimes, because as Calvin and Cory both said, we look at this strategy and think it's infallible, it'll never fail. We've spent time on it, great. Okay, then let's peel back a moment and look at it and say, what will fail? What's the likelihood of it failing? And what are we going to do when it does? Because when we get that Mike Tyson punch in the nose, we need to be prepared for it.
Yeah. And some of it's into your scenario planning when you go with it. Roger Martin talks about understanding what would have to be true, right? And so being able to look through it that way. The one thing that really surprised me that nobody really brought up with the why it's so hard to do product strategy is the fact that there's a lack of corporate strategy. Right? To me, that's one of the biggest things. How can you do product strategy if you don't have a well-defined, clear corporate strategy? A why that you're leveraging, understanding of distinctive capabilities or whatever it may be. That was the one that, if I was going to put an answer, I think that's where I would have gone.
I mean, I've worked in places and I've seen it where there was no, or the corporate strategy was so vague as to be just whatever we did was okay. So I worked on product strategies that fit into what I thought the product was supposed to do and what I heard from the customers. And maybe that isn't derived from a corporate strategy or a corporate vision or product vision or anything like that, but it was something. It was something to put a stake in the ground and say, this is what I think we're doing. This is why I think we're doing it. And this is the direction we're going. Please disagree with me. Because if you disagree with me, then we can have a debate and argument and conversation about why that is and what it should be instead. And maybe that leads to higher level things that we can set. But in the absence of anything, this is what I'm doing.
And I completely agree. That's what I even tell people. If you do not have a clear corporate strategy, you need to make some assumptions about what you think it is and validate those up, right? Steve, you've got your hand up.
Well, yeah, this conversation has given me flashbacks. I had a board meeting, and it was the first board meeting that I had ever been to. And they asked me a question that was probably the equivalent of it was a marketing question, but how much marketing money are you putting into the on-prem products versus the SaaS products? And I said, well, we're moving to SaaS. So 80% of my marketing money is going there. And the chairman said, well, I totally disagree with that. And he went off on a rant about, all of last year's revenue came from on-prem. And without reliving that total thing, then one of the other board members said, no, Steve's completely right. All of our money last year came from on-prem. We want our money in the future to come from SaaS. We should be putting all of our marketing spend on where we want the money to come from. And they argued with one another for 45 minutes while I stood in front of the room silent and wondering how in the world can this company succeed if the leadership doesn't even agree on what business we're in. And I'm reminded of Patrick Lencioni's phrase that Grant has heard me quote many a time. It really helps if we all work for the same company.
Yes. And that's why, Steve, for me, that my answer was going to be the big, the hardest thing about it is, what it is, that lack of corporate strategy. If we can't make decisions, and to Cory's point, yes, if we don't have that, we need to make our assumptions on what we think it is or should be, and socialize them up. But it's hard to do product strategy. It's a cascade, right? It's hard to do divisional or portfolio strategy if you don't have a corporate strategy. It's hard to do product strategy if you don't have a divisional or portfolio strategy. It's hard to do go-to-market strategy if you don't have a product strategy.
Right.
And so these all work together. And, at some point, if you've got a fault, there's a missing piece, it impacts everything else. So, wow, what a great conversation. I wanted to get us to our poll. And what we did was we asked, what part of product strategy do you find the most challenging? The options were getting enough time to truly understand the market, determining a strategy based on the current situation, prioritizing initiatives to execute on a strategy, communicating and gaining support for a strategy, or other. It depends. And Steve, I think this is a first. We don't have a single other it depends answer. So, for
That is
me,
shocking. You're right. I don't think there's ever been it must be that May did not contribute this week.
It must be, Joy's pretty good at the other as well, but the leading one right now, 47% said getting enough time to truly understand the market, which is where I voted. Number two, pretty close behind, 35% communicating and gaining support for a strategy. The other thing is everyone got a vote except for other, which is also, in our history, a little odd. Steve, did you vote for one?
I think I did. And if I did, it would have been the last one, communicating and gaining support.
Okay. And that was actually in a lot of our Monday answers. We had about 4 or 5 in a row, which were all about communicating. So that
channels, my story of the board doesn't even understand what is important for us going forward.
Yeah, exactly. Cory, did you vote? Yes, you did. You put in notes.
Yeah, I did. I was leaning toward other, but I don't like that answer typically. So I looked at which one I could get behind, and the gaining support for a strategy, less the communicating side, more the gaining support for a strategy, because as Steve said, we're all the same company. We should have the same strategy, or at least the same strategies, 1 or 2 of them. Yeah. And making sure everybody supports that strategy to move forward, I think is the more important thing for that.
Awesome. I agree with that, and I can get behind, especially the gaining support. It's the stakeholder alignment. And Steve and I were even talking this morning. There's part of that moves into your business planning and business case process, which is where it's gaining support for why we should be doing this. So thank you, Cory. Dave, did you vote?
I did. I also went with the communicating with others, and one of the things I feel strongly about is that too often I'll see people bring their product strategy in and they haven't rehearsed what they're going to deliver. And it is off the seat of their pants without any rehearsal, without any practice, and it comes off very unprofessional.
Yeah.
So the manner by which they articulate that strategy, if they're not clear, concise, and on target and have done that research, I just kind of shake my head and wonder why.
I get that. Calvin.
I thought about communicating and gaining support, but I think at least I have seen like, the hippo comes in and says, all right, we're going to do this, and everyone kind of follows suit, and you're off down the road with that product strategy. So I said getting enough time, because I think that the product discovery part of strategy is something that a lot of times organizations don't spend enough time on, and the challenging part is wrapped around the time and the patience, being able to dig into the data to really come out the other side with an answer to the question, why are we doing this, or why are we thinking about this?
And as you can see, that's what I voted for as well. I completely and totally agree. And maybe rephrase the question, because it's not just getting enough time to do it, it's actually getting access to the people to have those conversations with. We've heard a lot of people struggling with getting to the right personas to do their customer discovery and market. But what I have found is that, and maybe it's how you flip the question, having enough engagement with the market and understanding the market was critical to me getting a good strategy. So I sort of did the inverse, right? The reverse of it, that if you don't have that, it's going to be hard to get it. So I almost looked at it as what was the keys to my success. And when I see people struggle with it, I was sort of looking at the number one thing for me to do it right was this. So I was looking at it as the number one reason why people don't get it right, is that, right? So thinking of it that way. Any last thoughts on the most challenging part of strategy and the poll?
I wanted to make one last comment as you're closing up here, is something that Steve had mentioned about, the argument that he witnessed between these executives that were, arguing. I too have encountered that same type of situation. And the retort that I heard the one executive make, that I have put it into my repertoire of responses for the future, is we don't drive using the rear view mirror. We look through the windshield where we're going, not where we've been. And although it's important to understand where we've been and what got us there, it may not carry us forward.
Mm-hmm.
So,
no, it's very true. But it's also hard to find leading indicators, right? Things that a lot of the data we have is in the rearview mirror. How can you find those things in the rearview mirror who can help us see? Rita McGrath in Seeing Around Corners, and I bring this up a lot, always talked about ice melts at the edges. And so you need to make sure you're talking to people who are at the edges, who are seeing where the ice is melting, because that's where you're going to find the future happening.
And by edges there, we mean like customer facing people.
Yep.
Right. Hearing from support, hearing from sales, hearing from
services,
customer success and services, and saying, gee, the guys in the ivory tower at corporate are at the center of the ice.
Yeah.
Right. So we need listening posts on the edges. And I would add to that, product managers having firsthand experience with customers and potential customers is part of being near the edge of the ice.
I would completely and totally agree. Whether it's as listening to a researcher do it or doing it yourself when we teach you properly how to do it.
That's an inside joke that,
Cory, your thought.
I'm struggling with an idea here, so it's not fully formed, but it's
welcome to the topic of the week.
Yeah. It's something about
I've lived my life that way, Cory.
It's something about that focus question about saying no, is finding the areas that we really do want to focus on. And it's one of these things. I love this concept of on a scale of 1 to 10, if it's not a 9 or a 10, if it's not a hell yes, we don't do it. So imagine all the 7s and 6s and 4s that, get that new deal that we're putting into our roadmap that doesn't align with our strategy because we get something out of it, or it seems like a good idea, but it's not a 9 or a 10. And so I think that notion of limiting what your strategy is an interesting concept.
And that's concept of compelling many, right? I mean, This thing is a 6 or a 7 on a scale of 10. It's super compelling, but wait, it's taking resources from the 9s and 10s, which are the vital few. And we often don't see that.
Two things on that. First and foremost, I'm now in my head thinking of, could we create an NPS score for a backlog or for a release? How many 9s and 10s are there versus how many 6 and unders are there, and becomes an NPS for a release? The 9s and 10s made me think of that. But it also got me back to Frank Tate's 98 and 2, and how he's talking about 90% of the things we do are routine. 8% are common exceptions, and 2 are not uncommon exceptions. And you need to do the common right, and if you can do the common and differentiate, that's the best. this idea of how do you look at those nines and tens, how do you figure out what those nines and tens are, is something that I find interesting.
And you know, I've talked to people about that, and now we're, I think, somewhat away from strategy and more just into some tactical elements of using that strategy.
Yeah.
But going through a backlog, I remember one person said I had 500 items in the backlog, and I said, this is easy to address. Delete your backlog. I mean, anything older than a year is irrelevant anyway. But then, you know, put it in some, and I'm reminded of one of my early product management jobs. I had that scenario. I sat down with my lead developer and I gave him a red pen, and I took a red pen, and we went through the list of 500 things and said, must we have this to survive? Cross out anything that doesn't meet that criteria. And, you know, most everything went away. But I like the idea of the net promoter score idea of, if it's not a 9 or a 10, then the answer is 0.
And to bring this back to strategy, it should be judged against the strategy, right? Compared to our strategy, compared to what we're trying to do and our objectives and our winning aspiration, where to play, how to win, and everything we know. Is it a 9? If it's not, it's a 0, and I can get behind that. Getting to our first question, and which may be our only question for the lightning round today. How can you improve product strategy capabilities in your organization? So we're talking about this issue. It's a problem. People have this problem. What can you do to improve the product strategy capabilities in your organization? Cory, you get your CPO job and you've got a team of people who don't have great product strategy skills. What are you going to do besides calling Steve and I and having us come in and do principles of product strategy?
I mean, part of it is talk to everybody about it. Talk about why it's important. Talk about what they see that leads into that or that leads us away from that. That would be something really interesting. Again, it's not infallible. What if we learn something that proves that this strategy is not the right one? So I think talking to people, looking at the data, looking at the information that we have on our customers, our markets, our product usage, all the other things that we're looking at. But talk about how we're already aligning to the strategy, I think, is one interesting idea, is the things that we're delivering week to week or the things that we're moving towards, show how that is affecting the strategy that we're talking about. So pair those two things together is the first thing that I could think of.
I love that idea. That's a great way, where the rubber hits the road, helping them understand what they're doing and how that aligns with the strategy so they can now start seeing it from their lens. I love that idea. Calvin.
And my first thought was around product discovery, understanding at the core what products what problems your product is solving, and I think the other thing is to stop assuming, if you've been in an industry for a number of years, you have a sense of what things look like without gathering additional, and external information, because you already have a mindset that you already know. So really going outside of what you know, and really looking at where the market is changing. Again, going back to product discovery.
All right, and I love the idea of the discovery, and I'll take that and I'll sort of and extend it. I think putting a program together of everybody doing market discovery, then coming back and having a facilitated conversation of what we've learned and what it means to our product, and based on that, what we should do, is a great way to do that. I often tell people the way I ended up on the strategy side is that my first job out of grad school after getting my MBA was a market research analyst for GE. And so the guy who hired me said, Grant, I know you want to be a product manager. It was the late 90s. That was the hot job with the internet just taking off and everything, and software and all. And he said, let me tell you why you should come into a market research job, right? If you can start with market research, you're going to learn how to research and understand the market, understand dynamics and the competition, and it's going to put you in a better place to be a product manager than if you just went into a job, feet first. And I believe that that's one of the keys to my success was the fact that I've got a strong background in market research and competitive analysis. that sort of helps in the strategy side really do that first aspect of that why, what's going on in the market, what's the current situation, to help me figure out where to go. So awesome. Dave, I'd love to get your thought on this. And we're probably going to go military.
No, we won't. So a couple of things. We were talking, since this is the theme of this seems to be metaphors and quoting people we may or may not have ever met.
He's fitting right in.
So, if we think back to the point at which we were out there trying to find our one and only mate, how many 4s and 5s did we date? We always wanted the 9 or the 10. So the issue is we need to learn to focus. And, if that's what you want, you want a 2 or a 3, fine, but it's not going to get you there. The second part of it is, how can you improve your strategy capabilities in your organization? I think you have to understand who you are. And one of the best ways you do that is to do a SWOT analysis. What do we do well? What do we not do well? And let's not try to be somebody we're not. And where's the opportunity at? And if we go there, what are the threats that are going to come at us? So it's, you kill those things and your strategy will dramatically improve.
No, I completely agree. And I take it back to some of the conversation we had with the lack of corporate strategy. I could say the line is the way to improve your product strategy capability is make sure your product management team knows what the corporate strategy is. Right? That alone it could be helping with that. Steve.
Well, I may be taking this a different direction, which wouldn't surprise anybody, but as a product leader working with product managers, product owners, product marketing people, I think it behooves you to talk about strategy as a tactical aid, so that when something comes up, you're like, well, how does that map to our strategy? Is that going to move us forward? Does this align with the strategy? As opposed to, that seems like a good idea, that doesn't seem like a good idea. But I think looking for every opportunity to bring strategy into the conversation is how you create, I think, more capabilities in the way of along the lines of strategic thinking. And again, it goes back to my example from earlier of sitting down with my first dev team and saying, let me tell you what's going on in the business. We closed these deals. This is what they looked like. We had these losses. These were the circumstances. This is the revenue target we're shooting for this year. These are the marketing programs that we're shooting to do this year. And what was really interesting is after I did kind of this rough presentation, the CFO came to me, and I may have told this story before, but anyway, the CFO came to me and said, hey, I hear you have a great corporate prez. Could you give it to my people? And I'm like, why in the world would finance people care what we do here? Don't you guys just take one number from a spreadsheet and put it on another spreadsheet and call it a day? And he's like, believe it or not, we actually like working here. And so I did this pitch for the CFO, and then guess what? I got a call from customer support, and they said, hey, I understand you're doing this corporate pitch. And I had never intended to be an internal evangelist for our corporate strategy, but I ended up doing that. And I went to every single department. And the only place as you can imagine, the only place I had trouble was sales, because they're like, no, I think that strategy is wrong. I'm selling this product to somebody who's only got one server. And I said, well, we're going to take 100% of that server. So this is probably not the ideal profile. As I explained to you in the win-loss analysis, all of our deals have had 12 to 25 servers in them. And he's like, well, yeah, but my client only has one. And I said, yeah, and you're going to lose that deal. Here's our strategy: going after people who have dozens of servers.
Well, and God, you've just made me decide to change I think if I was going to say what you can do to improve it is help people understand the unbreakable link between who's your target customers and what are your differentiation and core capabilities, right? If anything, understand
intersected with our capabilities in ways that our competitors can't or won't offer.
Yeah, and so find customers who have a value profile that aligns with our core capabilities and have needs that we can address, right? I think that would be, that becomes a core thing for me. One thing I wanted to share, this is in our Principles of Product Strategy course, to test the strategy. It's clearly understood. Can people clearly understand it? And it informs decisions. And so another way that you can improve product strategy capabilities in your organization is if you're presenting a strategy, does it check these two boxes? Right? Is it clearly understood and can it inform decisions? And I love the informed decisions because I'm huge right now, I have been this year, about this idea of pushing decisions out to the edge, making it as atomic as possible. And if we do our job in product strategy and corporate strategy, we can push decisions to the edge, right? We can allow people to make those decisions. We don't have to have the things go up the ladder and that type of stuff. So great.
I feel the need to add a third element here. And maybe that's just because I cannot see a list of two without wanting it to be a list. I don't really know, but it should be clearly understood and easily shared.
Okay. And informed decisions.
And yes, so clearly understood, easily shared, and informs decisions. I'm thinking of like naming your company. So many company names come along and you're like, this looks beautiful as a logo or on the website until somebody says,
what the hell do you do?
Oh, well, I wasn't thinking that as much as how do you spell that? And I use a thing that's kind of cleverly called, I use a tool called missing letter. And the last E in that phrase is missing. It's a missing letter. I get it. And I'm not sure where that name came from, but I can just imagine how much frustration they must have talking to somebody on the phone about what their URL is.
Yeah.
It's missing letter without the E. Which E?
I get it. And Cory, I actually like yours as well. Maybe it's 4. Make sense, right? Clearly understood. It makes sense to people. You can easily share it, and it informs decisions. So
wow. So this is a great way to improve your class. Is just share a slide, and we'll crowdsource.
Our new topic of the week idea. I love this. All right.
I'm working on a section. Who wants to edit these slides with me?
All right. It's time to get to our lightning round. And the question for the lightning round is, what is your advice to a new product manager on the importance of product strategy? And Dave, for you, since you're new, word or phrase, a sentence at most, because we're running out of time, hence the lightning. Sometimes we have extra time. We call it a thunder round. And Calvin, I'm going to start with you. What's your advice to a new product manager on the importance of product strategy?
Wait, and this is the one word or one short phrase, right?
Yes.
Okay,
challenging. I was making time there for Calvin to actually.
Steve, I appreciate you. Boy, I came up with a couple of things. One is, it's really important. There's
so your advice to a new person on the importance of product strategy is that it's important.
Yes. But the other thing I thought is nothing interesting happens in the office. So go out and talk to customers and discover the product.
I can take that.
Question, but
I love that because it's sort of by action how important it is. You need to go talk to people. I love that. Dave, I see, and I went Cory. I went Calvin first because I was going to give Dave time to think about it. It's his first lightning round.
I'm good. So my advice to a new product manager on the importance of product strategy is be articulate, but be concise.
I love that. Articulate and concise. So far it's an important and go out and talk to people, Nahito, and then be articulate and concise. Cory.
My thought resonated with what Calvin said, which is test it.
Test it. All right.
Everywhere with everybody.
I love it. My partner, Steve.
I'm going to say the reason strategy is important is it tells you when to say no.
Ah.
Which is more often than you say yes.
And this
Yeah.
goes back to the 2s or 3s that were at the club when we were trying to date people, right?
Right. That was definitely a just say no scenario.
I love it, and I'm going to say it's what helps align everybody you're working with to make sure we're doing this, we're working in the same direction. And
Alignment.
so it's alignment is the key to it. So it's important because it's important, and you got to go talk to customers because be articulate and the advice: be articulate and concise. Test it. It tells you what you need to know, and alignment. Cory, did you have one last thing?
I had one last thing, which is have one.
Have a strategy. Actually, that is probably the ultimate advice to one: is you need to have a strategy.
Again, at least some stake in the ground you're headed towards, and this is what we're doing.
I concur completely, and I should have thought of that on my own, and I didn't, but I agree. So, what a wonderful conversation. We do this every week. We have the topic a week, and what a great conversation. Unbelievable panel. Calvin, Cory, Dave Jones, thanks for joining us. My partner, Steve Johnson. And here's how it works. Mondays, we put the open-ended question in the community. On Wednesdays, we have the poll. And on Fridays, we have these wonderful conversations where every week I'm challenged to learn and change my assumptions. And I just really appreciate the ability we have to talk with smart people about product management and learn and grow and share what we're thinking. So thank you guys very much. We'll see you next week in the community. Take care, everybody.